All right, we are live. I am here with Rev Dan, and I am currently 43 and 0, and Dan here is going to get a chance to be the one in 43 and 1. How do you feel about your odds going into this?
Well, I would compare it to the Hammer House of Horror episode where the man buys the mirror to stare into the portal of hell, and then he ends up seeing Satan in the mirror and regretting his decision. You might regret your decision, but I've always struggled with not having to blink, so especially on TV doing interviews, you might have a chance.
Well, I've done some of these where I've gone 40 minutes without blinking, 55 minutes without blinking, and I can promise you that usually afterwards I do regret doing it. So, but yeah, how's everything going with you? What you got going on?
Oh, we just finished. Of course, I've been managing the Bloodbath Behemoth, the Strong Style Psycho Tank on the independent scene. We made a big return after a few years of retirement. We've both been doing this over 20 years. But after a few years of retirement, we came back at WrestleMania weekend in Tampa, Florida last year and rejoined the deathmatch world and had quite a run in 2021 with promotions like ICW No Holds Barred, and we were at IWA Mid-South. We were all over the Southeast, and we were just in New Jersey. We went all over the place in 2021. And so Tank is taking a rest. The COVID even came to the door of darkness and got me and him both over the holidays. So we're
Oh no.
recovering from that. He's letting his body heal up from all the death matches of 2021. And we're starting back up in February, and things are going to get busy. We've already announced the Southern Sickness Deathmatch Tournament in Indiana in May. This is the first deathmatch tournament he's announced this year. We're also going to be a part of the ICW No Holds Barred event in Chattanooga in March. And February, we've got some surprises lined up as well. It's going to be a fun year. We're hoping to be involved in the WrestleMania weekend festivities as well. So yeah, it's been busy, but been enjoying the break for the moment as it's about to ramp back up.
I hear you. I hear you. And just for peace of mind, I'm going to load this up on my phone real quick just to make sure that everything sounds the way it should. Just for peace of mind.
No worries. Always good to have backups,
Oh yeah,
unless the
always.
authorities are looking for you.
Okay. Sounds good. So guess let's go ahead and get into this. Don't know if any doesn't seem anybody's watching yet, but maybe somebody will pop in.
So this
So
is recorded and streamed like a later also like after the live stream. Is it available to watch?
it is. It is
Yep.
available afterwards.
Excellent.
So once again, going into this 43 and 0, giving Rev Dan a chance to make it 43 and 1, and we want to start this off right. Can you give your best promo of how you'll approach a staring contest?
I will stare at you as though you stole something from me. And you don't want to be that person because when people wrong the Rev, I usually send Tank after them. And I'll usually just have to stare them down real good for him to know that's who the target is.
Alrighty, well, I definitely don't want Tank sent after me. Alrighty, let's go with the traditional first question. that I've asked in all 44 interviews is if you could collaborate with anybody on anything, who would it be? I'll count you down from 5, and when you start answering that question is when we start the staring contest. So, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
On a wrestling level, it would be the great minds, people like Gary Hart and Eddie Graham, and people that are no longer with us. I would use my necromancy powers to rise them from the grave and learn from them, pick their brain. Not literally, of course. I know when you see a person like me, you would have assumptions. But no, I would like to get their knowledge and find out exactly what makes them tick and what makes them what makes them go about the way they do. If there's anyone else from a musical perspective, I would of course love to have Dimebag Darrell back to life and hear his music again, and maybe get to have that on my podcast again. But I don't know. You're really getting me here because I am holding out. But oh my God, fine, you got me. I blinked.
Well, it was a valiant effort. I am now 44-0, and I've already announced on my Twitter that when I hit the 50-0, because I'm gonna hit the 50-0, we all know I'm gonna hit the 50-0. I'm going to contract somebody to make a wrestling style promo photo poster of all 50 people I've beat.
Oh, I see what this is. You're getting me on here for clout so you can add me to the list of the people you went over on. That's smart booking, kid. Smart booking.
Gotta go for the clout. Gotta go for the clout. And thank you so much for being willing to come on. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, no problem. Thank you for having me. It was a lot of fun, and I enjoy the different format. I do a lot of podcast interviews. I host a podcast myself, and there's just a certain way things are done in that environment that can get repetitive from time to time. So I like that this is a different type of format.
Well, for those who have watched my videos and my streams before, you know that at this point, I'm already about 8 minutes in without blinking. I'm going to attempt to go the rest of the interview without blinking as well. And one thing we started doing in the previous stream is that for every question I ask, we're going to see if how far you can go into the question, answering the question without blinking. And at the end of the stream, if I blink at any point in the stream, I'm going to have to take some hot sauce.
Oh, okay. Sure, I'll give it a shot, but sounds good.
But if you're watching this live now, or if you're watching it after the fact, if you've made it this far in, I've put all of Rev's socials and all of his links in the video description. Go ahead, follow him everywhere, listen to his podcast, and if you haven't already done so, I'd appreciate if you'd like the stream and subscribe to my channel as well. But let's go on to the next question, and we can see how far you can go into it without blinking. But what horror movie setting would be your ideal setting for having a wrestling show in?
A Serbian film. I'm kidding. I'm kidding. I got you with that one, didn't I? No, it would actually be Dawn of the Dead, because, I mean, how awesome would it be to run a wrestling show in a shopping mall full of zombies?
That would definitely be something interesting. That definitely that would give a new meaning to the term hostile wrestling crowd.
Yeah, Yeah, you think the Philadelphia fans are tough. What do you get a hold of those guys?
Yeah, hecklers don't really have any footing on a crowd of zombies.
They wouldn't have a leg to stand on.
Indeed, they wouldn't. But I think you and Tank could handle yourselves. I don't know about whoever Tank's opponent would be, but I think you and Tank could at least.
Oh yeah, you just always aim for the head. No body
Might
shots. Don't go back to check to see if they're coming back.
might even be able to sway over some of the crowd.
Yeah, I mean, I'd like to think that they were fans.
So one I've interviewed some people who are in the horror industry, and one conversation I had with them was what place did they think gore and blood had in horror films, because to some degree and to some extent that often appears to be overdone. But I'm going to add on to that question, since you've got the horror podcast and you're in wrestling. What place do you think it has in horror films as well as in wrestling?
I mean, I think it's essential for both. Now, the level of which you want to provide it can certainly be up for debate, but I think in terms of horror movies, it's also situational. There are certainly ghost stories that don't require a great deal of blood or gore to tell. There are certain types of horror stories where it's an exception, but I think generally speaking, that's what people come for, and depending on what type of movie you're trying to make or what type of story you're trying to tell, then maybe a ton of blood and gore is a great thing. But also, likewise, it could not be if it doesn't fit the story. For wrestling, I think it's similar but different. I think blood drew me to wrestling immediately as a child, like so many, seeing the magazines on the shelves. My uncle was the great Gypsy Joe, who was a hardcore wrestling innovator in his own right, and there were pictures around my great grandmother's house of him with blood all over his face, and so that, and seeing the magazines of people like Abdullah the Butcher, like that drew me to Ric Flair, just a bloody mess all the damn time, drew me to wrestling. That was a key ingredient, like. Cage match with blood is like one of the coolest things you could see growing up, and it's just evolved over time. I mean, it's certainly an element like AEW has tried to do kind of traditional pro wrestling again, including angles with heat and blood and things like that you haven't seen for many years in WWE. But also, you can go into the world that I'm in a lot of the time now, is the deathmatch world, where that's what they come to see, and the majority of the show is very extreme violence, and there is an audience for that as well. So it really just depends on what you're trying to create and what type of story you're trying to tell.
Alrighty, and if you happen to be in the chat right now, let us know that you're here. Let us know that if you have any questions for Rev Dan, and I'll definitely be willing to entertain any questions from the chat. So next, and we'll see how far you can go in to answering this without blinking. Yeah.
Spoiler alert, I've not gone very far in any of them without blinking, but I figured it would be better to give you a good answer.
It's worth an attempt, but where did the idea for the character Rev come from?
It's an extension of me, as they always say in wrestling, though there are many, many influences on what the overall character became over the years. A lot of times, it's just me when I'm at my most angry and most extreme. But what I would describe it as is if Norwegian black metal occurred in the deep south instead of in Europe. And the Rev would have been a leader in that movement for sure. So there's a lot of influences from horror movies. Originally, when I started the character, it was just like kind of a straight rip off of Otis Driftwood from House of a Thousand Corpses. But over time, you add more influences when you're working on something and you make it your own. Most characters or acts in wrestling kind of start as ripping something else off, and over time you start to find yourself and find your footing. And for me, there would be influences within wrestling, like Michael Hayes certainly is a big influence. Jake the Snake, of course, can't not shout out Kevin Sullivan and Jim Mitchell and the guys who have done the Satanic deal before me. Um, Even back to like the great Mephisto, Frankie Kane. There's a lineage of this in pro wrestling. Though I will say, when I started doing it in the early 2000s, it was pretty controversial still. Like now, people don't bat an eye at the fact that have an upside down cross emblazoned into my forehead. But back then, it was especially in the South where we were. The rejects came up, the Devil's Rejects, my stable at the time, which Tank originated in. There was way more than Tank originally. There was like 5 of us, and then just over time, Tank's the only one left. But yeah, it's wild. It's crazy how things have changed over the years.
Well, I live in the South, so I definitely understand that sentiment. So, talking about scary things, I think we're kind of feeding in perfectly to this next question. Is have you ever experienced anything that was scarier than Tank with hair?
Maybe my ex-wife, but other than that, no. We don't really talk about the Tank with hair days. I don't know what he was thinking then, but it wasn't his best look. But or at least that's what most people think. They just, and that's not that he looked bad, but it's just like when you think of Tank, you think of the bald head, you think of the big beard, you think of him romping and stomping, and not a dude with hair. Just weird.
It's like Kane with hair.
Yeah, this is not right.
So, since you've got the horror podcast and you do wrestling, if you could have more overlap between the two worlds, how would you do that overlap?
Very carefully. I think one thing about horror gimmicks in wrestling, you got to kind of toe the line there. You got it, because there's a point where it can get way too ridiculous, and it will go from something that is an organic movement that people are into to something that is just seen as hokey. And I think we've seen that happen a number of times in professional wrestling with a number of different horror gimmicks. You see it gets over for a while and people are buying it, and then they just can't help themselves. They push it just a little too far beyond any realm of plausibility, and then you lose that organic support. So I would say I don't know if any more is necessary, because it seems like there's a whole lot right now. But I would say I like seeing it, and I just would like to see it done well.
Wonderful. We're almost at about the 20-minute mark, so I've gone about right at 19 minutes without blinking. So, gotta see if we can go the rest of the way. But if you've watched 19 minutes in, you've watched 90% more than. Sorry. You've watched more than 90% of my other viewers, so kudos to you. Thanks for sticking around. Obviously, it's the magnetism of Rev Dan here that's kept you here the whole time. But how did you connect with Tank? Where did that start?
I met Tank, God, before I even went to NWA Wildside in the year 2000. So it would have been probably earlier that year. sometime in the year 2000 at a show in Dalton, Georgia. There's a story we tell often. My uncle and him had actually had an encounter up in Middle Tennessee where Joe ended up busting his head with a baseball bat, and he had to get all these staples in the back of his head. So Tank like hated him for a long time, and there was legit heat. They wanted to fight and blah blah blah. Of course, Joe was just a crazy old timer that he got a kick out. He was working. He thought it was part of the match, but Tank thought the dude was trying to kill him. So I had only heard rumors of Tank. He had taken a break. I think one of his children may have been recently born. So he had taken a break from the local scene, but he was already kind of a local legend. He'd been wrestling since 1996. And so when I'm around these shows, and I broke into business as a ring announcer. So when I'm around these shows, I meet Tank, and like I'm afraid I hear the rumblings from the locker room, like, oh, he's gonna whip your ass when he meets you because you're Gypsy Joe's nephew. So I met him and was terrified of him, and then we instantly hit it off and found out that like we liked all of the same movies and music and other types of entertainment, and quickly he became one of my best friends and has been for well over 20 years. We started working together officially. I mean, I was always a big supporter of them, even when I was an announcer in NWA Wildside. I was in a heavy metal band at the time, and I came out and brought the band. We did a live version of their Tank and Iceberg's entrance music for one of the shows. I already had a connection to Tank, but in 2005, I kind of got tired of being pushed around by everybody as an announcer and decided to take matters into my own hands, and that's when the Rev was born, and I formed the stable, the Devil's Rejects. Of course, Tank was the first person that I contacted for that. Actually, if you want to know the inside story, he actually contacted me about the managerial gig. I was on a brief break to work on the music thing, and he was like, hey, you want to come be a manager? You want to turn heel? And I was like, that sounds marvelous. So we were off at that point, and here we are 20 years later.
Wow. Yeah, I'm thinking about putting on a show. Well, I'm not thinking about it. I'm going to be putting on a wrestling show later on this year that's going to have kind of a horror spin on it. So I'll definitely have to get y'all involved in that. And one thing I've thought about doing, and I don't even know what's involved in it. I've briefly talked to people about it. Is I've thought about dipping my feet in the waters as a wrestling manager. Have the gimmick where I come out with the wrestler, walk around the ring, and don't blink the entire time. Just the whole match. I don't blink.
It could be you might have something there.
So let's circle back to Seeking Human Victims briefly. How do you pick what movies you use in Seeking Human Victims? Because I recently listened to the one that you did on The Shining, and it was quite entertaining.
Oh, thanks. Well, appreciate you checking it out. And yeah, me and the round table that you heard there on the show, which consists of my wife Annie and my childhood best friend Muji, and sometimes some additional guests. We will usually meet ahead of time and just kind of decide topics first of all, because we do it by seasons. We do usually 10 episode seasons. Sometimes we'll stretch them out to 12. That gives us like a set amount of time to do a show and then take a break, get our faculties together, come back, and it keeps us on a schedule though, so that we have consistent content coming out. And so this is the 13th season that is just started here in 2022, and we have done a few of these previously, what we call the Terror Timeline, where we go and look at a director or a creator of some kind's career through the years in order. So we like actually map out when they started, when the movie came, etc. So this season we decided to do the timeline of Stephen King adaptations. So that's how we picked the movies for this. Was like, okay, what are the essential early Stephen King adaptations in order? and the 10 best, essentially, because we're trying to keep it to 10. And, well, the early ones took up 10 easy, so we actually ended up splitting it up. We're going to do 2 seasons where we do 10 later ones and 10 earlier ones. So this is a massive project that we're taking on this year, but so far it's been a lot of fun.
I've thought about splitting what I do into seasons, but it's just so hard, especially lately, to get people to come on and be guests regularly. And part of the reason it's become harder, and it sounds cocky saying this, but people have found out that I don't lose, and people don't want to come on here and lose. Like
No, I don't do the job.
I've literally had people tell me I don't want to come on because I don't want to lose.
Well, that's the business for you. I guess the entertainment business as a whole, right?
I guess I need to. I guess I need to find the staring contest equivalent of Brock Lesnar.
Yeah, absolutely. Find you your own tank.
Yes, find my own take. What modern day wrestler do you think has incorporated horror best into their gimmick?
The Carver of Cutter's Alley.
Okay.
He's a guy that works on the indies, a lot in the deathmatch world, and he does like a Texas Chainsaw Massacre inspired gimmick, kind of, but he's like does an amazing job of making it like his own and original, and because there's a lot of like crappy leather faces on the indies, and they're the rest his soul, the real Leatherface. Mike Kirshner passed away earlier this year, the real Leatherface in wrestling, the former Corporal Kirshner. But there was a lot of bad rip-offs of him on the indies for many, many years. And the Carver takes something that was kind of a tired and beaten up trope and really injects new life into it. And I also am a fan of Sage Sin Supreme, the Pumpkin Queen. She has this great pumpkin themed face paint and comes out to like the Silver Shamrock theme and Living Dead Girl, and has this jack-o'-lantern, and it's just a cool deal. And then in the major leagues, I think Malachi Black does a great job. I think he's one of the dudes to come along and really do that stuff right when it's been so hokey. And if he's not careful, then he's gonna teeter on the edge of hokey too. But that's not in his control because he's not writing the show. But he does it. He's doing a great job of that. I think he's just really knocking it out of the park. And Abaddon, I think, is great there as well. I think her gimmick is super cool. I think I would. That's like on the list of people I kind of like to manage at some point, just because I think there's like a lot of potential there for more with a mouthpiece, and her gimmick doesn't really allow her to do that. So I think there's a lot of good ones going on today.
Yeah, I definitely agree about Abaddon. And I want to say that I saw Carver. I could be getting him mixed up with somebody else, but I want to say I saw Carver at one of the Haas tournaments a couple of years ago. I could be mixing him up with somebody else.
He wears like a leather mask, like a mask
Right.
made of human skin, and usually it carries like an axe to the ring, and it's just totally crazy, like right out of a slasher movie. He's got that leg brace thing that Matthew McConaughey has in Texas Chainsaw Massacre: The Next Generation. It's pretty wild. I love his gimmick. Oh, and Cruel. Now he just started, the former Logan Creed / Mads Kruger in MLW in the deathmatch world, and elsewhere he has started doing his character Cruel, and it's like the Jason Voorhees of hardcore wrestling, and he really does a great job. He's very early in it, but that is definitely a guy to keep an eye on because he captivates people everywhere he goes doing that. It's all they can talk about.
I haven't seen him do that character, but I like Logan Creed. I think he's a good wrestler.
Oh yeah, great. He's a guy when I was booking, which I've also, beyond the managerial role as a manager. First of all, you got to make yourself useful because it's a whole lot more than just going out to ringside and standing there. But I also at one point worked in the office and creative at different times in my career, and I was the booker for Anarchy Wrestling in Georgia, which is in the former NWA Wildside building in 2016, and we worked together then.
Alrighty, 30 minutes in. We've oscillated between like 1, 2, 3 concurrent viewers. So we've got some people watching. So if you're watching now, this is possibly your last chance to ask a question for Rev Dan if you've got one. I'm going to ask you my last question right now. And let's have a concerted effort to make it like halfway through this without blinking.
Okay.
Tell us about NWA Anarchy Fright Night 2006.
Wow, you pulled one from the archives there. That was a pivotal moment in the early run of the Devil's Rejects. That's when I was defeated by Jerry Palmer and his team. AJ Styles was involved, which, what gratitude that guy showed, right? I only came up with his phenomenal one nickname, but he shows up and screws me out of the match. It was a casket match, so they had to dump me in the casket for them to win, and certainly that's what happened. Abyss was there as well. They really called out all the big guns to try to take me out. And they did, and ultimately, yeah, I ended up in the casket and bloodied up a little bit. But it was in front of a packed house in Helen, Georgia. And earlier that night, I got attacked by a fan. There was a pregnant lady in the crowd holding a baby. I swear she was smoking a cigarette, too. And she reached up and grabbed me by the hair and tried to attack me. So led me in a no-win situation, because what am I going to do? Punch the pregnant lady holding a baby? So I just did what any gentleman would do and pie-faced her back down into the chair.
Probably the only thing you can do at that point. Well, we're 32 minutes in. You've run the gambit on my questions. Did the best you could without blinking. I've gone 32 minutes without blinking. If there's anybody that's watched to this point in the video and hasn't liked and subscribed, I don't know if there's anything else I can do to get you to do so at this point. But all I can do is ask that you go to Rev Dan's links in the video description, follow, listen to all of his podcasts. But all I can do now is give you the opportunity to tell us what you've got going on, what you've got to talk about, what you've got to plug.
Yeah, thank you for the opportunity. Thank you for having me on. I will say, I plugged some of the dates we were going to be at earlier, but if you want to keep up with all of my dates, of course, follow me on the Twitter and the Instagram. And of course, the new season of Seeking Human Victims. There's a new episode every Monday that comes out. And this coming week, we have Cujo is the next episode, followed by Children of the Corn. So it'll be a fun dive into those. Be sure to join us. Have a Patreon at patreon.com/OGScare. You can subscribe for $1 a month there and get the entire back catalog, 13 seasons of Seeking Human Victims. They usually keep about 2 seasons worth up in the normal podcast feed for free, but eventually those fall off. So if you want access to the full archive, that $1 a month unlocks that. And we have higher tiers as well. I also share a lot of wrestling content on there. A lot of demand for that lately. So, since One Good Scare produces my wrestling promos, I share a lot of wrestling content there. I actually do a exclusive wrestling podcast there where you'll get thoughts from me from shows and kind of backstage stories that you won't hear anywhere else, called The Confessional, also available for that $1 tier a month. So you get a whole lot for your buck over at the Patreon. You can also get one of these handy dandy Rev t-shirts. You can go to my web store, which is the One Good Scare production store on What a Maneuver, which is there on my Twitter in the links. You can get the Rev t-shirt as well as the Seeking Human Victims t-shirt that's available. And go out and support us. And we will see you on the road coming up real soon. We're going to be hitting some spots in February that haven't quite been announced yet. But don't worry, you'll know when we show up. And then, of course, we already talked about March through May. A lot of big things happening. And just very glad to be back. Love professional wrestling, and it's my first love in many ways, and being able to do that and still do the podcast and other things has been great. One has fed the other, so thank you for supporting that. Also, there's another podcast I co-host that is just we put it out like maybe monthly, sometimes quarterly. It's the NWA Wildside Retrospective podcast on Exile on Bad Street from the Between the Sheets podcast with Chris Zellner. And me and Jeff G. Bailey go back on our time at NWA Wildside, episode by episode. The most recent episode is up from the end of 2001, and that's also serves as our tribute to Jimmy Rave, who recently passed away. He was a dear friend, came up with us in NWA Wildside. So we share a lot of memories from Jimmy's early career with us there. And it's a great, emotional, almost 5-hour long episode. So you can see why we only put them out occasionally. We go through a few months of TV and like go through everything on the show and give our memories, and then we take a break because that's a lot of talking. but check that out as well, in addition to my other stuff.
I don't think I could go 5 hours without blinking.
There's a challenge for you.
Well, I'm just now nearing the 40-minute mark, 37 minutes without blinking, 44-0, 6 wins away from the 50-0. And all I can do is just keep doing these. So if you've got anybody that you'd like to come on, be a guest, go up against me in a staring contest, feel free to let me know. This is the point, though, that I'm going to get you to say, I was not able to beat Joe in a staring contest.
I was not able to beat Joe. I did the J-O-B to J-O-E in the staring contest. But we can have round 2 in the ring if you want. I kid.
I'm sure that would end completely different, and being that I had brain surgery and am missing part of the bottom of my skull, might end with me not walking out of that ring.
Yeah, I said, don't tell me your weakness.
Well, yeah, that's definitely that's definitely the one. Good chair shot to the back of the head. Lights out.
Thank you so much for having me on, Joe. It's been a great year, and glad to be back out here and doing it again.
All right. Well, before we end, one thing I've done to try to help get guests is get my guests to call somebody else out to come on, be a guest, go up against me in a staring contest. So if you could call anyone out to come on, go up against me as a guest in a staring contest interview, who would you call?
I'm going to call out Al Getz from the Charting the Territories blog and podcast. He's a dear old friend of mine, and he surprised me with a few things last minute. So I don't know why he came to mind as the guy to do it, but yeah, I think Al will give you a run for your money.
All right, Al, you've been called out to come on, be a guest, and go up against me in a staring contest. But as of this point, I don't have anybody else scheduled yet. So I'd like to say that we'll have somebody on next week. We might not. As of this point, I don't know who. But we're going to go ahead and end now. Thanks again, Rev Dan. And can't wait to see you at another wrestling show. And we'll see y'all the next time, whenever that is.
Thanks, Joe.